Cyberpunk 2077 is a giant game. As such, there are a ton of features in this that just kind of get blown past us, introduced a little bit too quickly, or just utterly secret. In this video, I want to share with you a ton of those in the form of basically tips and tricks around the game that will, on one hand, give you some new free items, including a great card you get right off the bat, give you some new ways to actually play the game, some perks you definitely need to take, other ones you should totally ignore, and even how you could almost glitch the game to effectively get Judy as a companion. I have a ton of stuff in this one that will hopefully overall just improve your experience and make the game a bit more fun, but also just some tips I've picked up from playing and read online over the past week or so. If you guys enjoy the content, you can leave a like or get subscribed. I'm sure for the vast majority of you, you'll find out at least some new stuff around the game overall. One of the first ones is probably one that many of you are aware of, but just kind of forgot about or don't know the intricacies of, and that is food in Cyberpunk 2077. So you have an entire consumables category in your inventory, and you probably know it's there, you've passed it a few times. Now the vast majority of this is going to be filled up by alcohol that is just not useful. It actually gives your character debuffs overall, although since you're probably looting this, it is good to every once in a while go through and sell all of that alcohol, because some of it can sell for a decent amount, especially early on. But even further, there are a couple of consumables that you'll almost certainly want to be using, in particular if you're playing on some of the harder difficulties or just want a buff for a bit, as several consumables you'll pick up in this game actually have a time span of around 30 minutes and do provide some quite tangible benefits to your character. Take for example Health Booster, which will just boost your health overall for 20% for half an hour, which is actually a ridiculously good buff. And in your inventory right now, there's probably similar consumables that will add things like stamina or increase your health or even critical hit damage. It's just one of those categories I feel like we knew about, we kind of forgot about, and large in part I know I've been ignoring, but then every once in a while, it's good to take a pass through and just take note that you have some pretty powerful stuff in there. In this, it also, of course, brings attention to the HUD component in the top left corner. This is actually a really handy thing that I think some people are overlooking. Basically, it'll highlight your status effects and the duration of them. So between getting ran over by a car and how long it'll take you to stand back up, to other things like enemies shooting you with something that deals poison damage or hacking you and dealing fire damage, the duration of that damage will always pop up in this top left corner, including other things like healing bonuses. It's really handy to just keep an eye on and glance at every once in a while, and although I'm sure many of you are aware of that, it is definitely something you can overlook or not really understand at first glance. Something that isn't an overt side activity in Cyberpunk 2077, but is immensely useful and fun to do, is parkour in this world. In particular in the city, there are a lot of buildings that you could almost do a Spider-Man-esque jump from one building to another, get to crazy spots, and actually if you're going for a rifle build, get to some really good sniping spots in the game. This of course is extra fun if you have one of the cybernetic enhancements to have a double jump or a higher jump. The double jump in particular is really valuable here because the double jump has this unique mechanic where, let's say you jump off a building, if you use your double jump kind of midway, it'll actually reset the fall. So you could basically avoid all fall damage or survive falls that you otherwise wouldn't be able to by waiting a few seconds then using your second jump midair. But just overall, if you haven't tried parkour in this game, whether or not you are a sniper build, it could just be kind of cool or fun, but it never really tells you about this. Not even sure it was an intended feature at any point, but there's a lot of cool stuff you could find this way. Another really easy and quick one, when you're actually going into combat, you of course have your scanner. If you just quickly tap the scanner button, so on PC that'll be tab, it'll actually highlight all of the scannable objects for you, as well as highlight a ton of other stuff in the environment. Typically just before I start combat or when I'm trying to decide how to approach something, if you're being stealthy, just tapping this real quick is a really handy tool. The highlights only last for a couple of seconds, but it can give you a lot of information really quickly. Another pretty handy one that took me a while to actually realize is several grenades in this game are actually sticky grenades. Like several of the fragmentation grenades you can actually throw and stick to an enemy. This will vary from grenade to grenade, but it's definitely worth testing out and making note of. There's a perk where you can see the grenade radius, but even further, you can quickly switch between grenades by holding the weapon swap key. So whatever key you press to switch from one weapon to the next weapon, on PC that's going to be the Alt key, hold that and you'll have a ton of additional options, and if you scroll over to where the grenades are by hitting a second key, you could actually swap between some of the options you have in your inventory, including certain cybernetics. Basically, once you get to the open world segment of Cyberpunk 2077, you can get a Quadra Type R, and this will cost you nothing outside of having to do one side quest. And in particular, this is pretty cool because it is the Quadra Type R that was shown in much of the marketing material. So it almost had a cool little nostalgia effect, or made it feel a bit more special once I actually unlocked this one. The way you're going to want to do this is on the southern side of Haywood. Do this gig called Life's Work. It'll basically involve you going to an auto shop, and somebody who's looking to leave Night City wants to get their car back for the Badlands. It's a super easy one. Basically talk to this guy for a little bit, then from there go right around the corner and there's going to be an auto body shop that has taken his car, and you're going to have to get it back. Now technically the enemies here are pretty high level. I think for most players with the AI and how it is in this game, you kind of game the system a little, but even if you just want to go a sneak approach, all you have to do is get to a computer, upload software, and then just get in a car and drive away. Even if you're under fire at the end, you could pretty quickly just drive out of the garage and be a-okay. Otherwise, perhaps it'll take a few attempts to actually get through it, but honestly, I don't think most people have much trouble. And then just return the car, finish the quest overall. The client will be very happy that you helped him out in this way, and then just wait one day. One day after that, you'll actually get a text message from him describing how thankful he was, but how since he's kind of done with Night City, you could have his old car. Simply drive to the location on this subsequent quest and you will get a free Quadra Turbo R. And considering how early on you could just do this one, it's a nice one to do right after starting a new character, finishing out the prologue, considering you'll be right around Haywood anyway. Now, of course, it's not the fastest car in the game. There are definitely a lot of alternatives, but most good alternatives will either cost a bunch of money or they'll actually require several quests down the main quest tree to actually unlock, where this one you could do pretty early on. If you're really speccing into crafting in Cyberpunk 2077, or in general, if you just want to be a god in this game, because crafting definitely seems like it may have the highest ceiling overall, although don't quote me on that, it's still being tested. One way to get really good recipes for legendary items, or even some iconic items, those one-off rare items you can't really get too many of, are to do these blue skull missions on the map, technically called suspected organized crime activity. Every single time you do one of these, or at least in all 6 I tested for this video, it will award you a crafting recipe for a good weapon. These ranging from rare recipes to even some legendary recipes I got along the way, and of course some are some of those iconic weapons. You'll have to be specced into the crafting tree to actually make these, as well as have the components, but if you are in that tree, definitely do some of these skull missions. It's a good way to get a lot of those recipes unlocked for you. But if you're somebody who's struggling with Cyberpunk 2077, let me let you in on a little tip how to be a god in this game, and that is mods. Specifically armor mods seem to be one of the most easily ignored aspects that actually are one of the biggest aspects. So of course there's all those memes that you end up in some wacky or odd outfit depending on which has the best stats overall, but honestly focusing on the armor base stat, specifically how much armor it's providing to you alone, is a massive mistake. What you want to focus on are how many mod slots the armor pieces that you are using have. Now the vast majority of the time these will be highest on legendary armors anyway, which tend to have pretty good stats overall. In my past video in this series I showed you where you can get a ton of legendary armors if you're looking for them, but more or less from here, what you're going to want to do are either craft or buy Armadillo Mods, and these Armadillo Mods will just add flat armor to your armor. So an easy way is to go to City Center. City Center tends to have some of the best items in the game, roughly speaking. Go to one of the armor vendors or clothing vendors in this area, and in all likelihood they're selling a Armadillo mod, probably for 500 to 1,000 eddies, which for how much benefit this will give you, especially considering you could buy them early on and it's relatively easy to get 1k eddies. These are super powerful. They may only have one at a time, but simply run out the door, wait 24 hours, and their stock will refresh, meaning they'll typically have another one. Or alternatively, if you want an even cheaper method to get some of these, in the north side section of Watson, there is this Assault in Progress gig. It's relatively easy to find. It's going to be on the south side of Watson overall, right around where all these roads interconnect. And basically, walk into this gig, clear out all of the enemies, and in one of the boxes here, you will actually find a crafting spec for the Armadillo mod. And then literally, just for some common and uncommon components, you can craft the Armadillo mod for all of your armors. Now, it seems like the way crafting mods will work in this game is it's going to have a random chance at giving you one of the uncommon, common, or rare versions. So unlike like some of the other items, with this one it is RNG based. You craft here and then you'll have different tiers pop up in your inventory. Now as far as you craft some of the epic or legendary versions of the Armadillo mod, it's not totally clear if you even can. I did quite a bit of searching online. Some people have argued you need a high enough crafting skill. Other people argue that didn't work for them. Some people say you have to beat a certain quest, so it's unknown overall. But for the vast majority of people, do some crafting here. It's really cheap and you'll have a much higher stat character. Although alternatively, if you're trying to avoid dealing with armors overall, you could also get a cybernetic implant to give you a flat 200 armor. More or less, you're going to want to go to this Ripper Doc, who is roughly at the center of Watson. You can find him right where all these roads are interconnecting. It's a little confusing to find him. You have to run around and go under the road you'll fast travel to or drive on. But once you make your way over here, what you're going to find is for 15,000 eddies, a 200 armor cybernetic implant. And okay, 15,000 eddies is definitely on the pricier side. This is definitely more expensive than going the Armadillo route, but it's definitely not ridiculous and a lot cheaper than a lot of the other alternatives, especially if you're trying to spend money buying outfits. This gives you a nice option of just buying the cybernetic implant and not caring as much about which clothes you are wearing. You can just wear some of the coolest clothes in the game and not stress about mod slots or overall armor ratings. Although speaking of Ripper Docs, another pretty important aspect to consider is the ability to respec your character. As you probably know, there is an option at a Ripper Doc to buy a 100,000 eddy item that will reset your stats and give you the ability to start over. Except it only resets one stat in particular, and that is refunding all of your perk points. I know a lot of people have kind of been going gung-ho on their builds, just doing whatever because they thought they had this in their back pocket, but your attributes are not reset. They will remain exactly the same. All you can do is spend your perk points once again. And of course, your skills will still stay the same. You don't have to re-level those up either. Not a huge issue one way or another, just an important thing to keep in mind. But speaking of perks you're not going to want to end up taking, there is this cool perk that allows you to throw knives. Don't take this. It is literally one of the stupidest, or perhaps just the stupidest perk in this game overall. It sounds really cool, giving you the ability to literally throw knives at enemies, especially for stealth characters. That's quite handy. Except it's kind of broken in that one, you are literally throwing the knives in your inventory. Like, it is taking a weapon that you have equipped and throwing it at an enemy. Then you'll have no weapon in your hand anymore. You just threw that thing. Even further, if you miss the enemy, 9 times out of 10 for me at least, the knife would just disappear. So to make this viable, I had to equip like 3 knives and hopefully never miss, or they would just disappear. Otherwise, you could find them on the enemy's corpse most of the time. So although it looks really cool and it's kind of fun to mess around with, it sucks in comparison to basically any other weapon in the game, and you probably won't have enough knives to actually fuel this. Not to mention, after using the knife and picking it up, you have to go in your inventory to re-equip it, which is just super clunky. Conversely, one of the best perks to take in this game that I think basically everyone should is Cold Blood. This also under the cool tree. The difference with this one is you can just put 1 level into it extremely early on. It's the very first perk in the cool Cold Blood perk tree. And the reason you want to take this is it'll actually unlock the ability to get Cold Blood, which will start progressing the Cold Blood skill. Cold Blood's basically after you take down an enemy, you'll have this countdown timer in the top left corner, that little status bar I was talking about earlier in the video, and you can actually get stacks of it. It'll give you certain bonuses. If you take perks in here, it'll give you more bonuses. You get more stacks on it. But the point is, anytime you go into combat, you'll proc this, giving you a slight bonus to begin with, but also granting experience towards this skill tree, which will give you some insane bonuses, like 10% health overall, bonus stamina overall, an additional 20% to crit chance. So if you haven't just spent that 1 perk point on Cold Blood because you thought you'd never use it, definitely do it, even just to get some of those passive bonuses from the skill overall. Okay, so this one's kind of silly, but there's actually a way to cheese some of these boxing match challenges that you have in the game. I, for one, actually despise these boxing matches. The hitboxes are super weird. I was getting hit when I don't think I should have been. Basically, before the boxing match starts, if you just go into the arena and drop a melee weapon, I tried to do this with ranged weapons and it didn't work, you could actually use that melee weapon during the boxing match. So once the match starts, run up to it and you'll have to hit the equip hotkey, not the pickup hotkey. Both of them should appear on screen as you're looking at it. And then again, hit that key that switches to the next weapon. You'll take out whatever melee weapon you just put down. You still have to actually go through the fight against the other person, and depending on how tough it is, this still may not be super easy, but it definitely is a huge advantage depending on how good of a melee weapon you have in your inventory. It's totally an exploit. It'll probably get patched at some point, but it is kind of handy if you're just trying to get through these or getting frustrated with the system overall like I was. Another one that isn't quite an exploit, but a way to cheese the system. You've probably encountered quite a few cyberpsychos in Cyberpunk 2077. These functionally being 17 little boss fights scattered around the map. They're really fun, and many of them have some kind of twist or some aspect of them that make them different from typical combat, which is nice. So right off the bat, if you don't listen to the phone call you get every time you discover one of these, you get bonuses if you don't finish them off completely. So you can take them down or get them into that down state using something like the Pax weapon mod that makes your weapon non-lethal. In fact, you could do the entire fight using a lethal weapon, but just deal the finishing blow with a non-lethal weapon. And if you do kind of keep them alive like this and then finish out the quest, you'll get more rewards overall. But as far as I can tell, once you actually get to that point, call Regina, actually turn in the Cyber Psycho overall, you can just go back and finish them off to get even more rewards from the NCPD. This because the vast majority of these guys do have a bounty, so it'll give you street cred, eddies, and some experience on top of the street cred, eddies, and experience you got from completing the Cyber Psycho quest. So it's kind of like gaming the system. Leave them alive until you get your reward, then double dip for the second reward from the NCPD. But then we have the pretty cool one of getting Judy to functionally being a companion or follower in Cyberpunk 2077. As I'm sure many of us have discovered, there are no companions in this game. It was never an intended feature. And unfortunately, the way to actually get her as a companion is kind of exploitative. You can't progress one of the main story quests, so it'll kind of halt your progress. But considering how much some people love Judy, I'm sure some of you will go for this just to have her around. And more or less, what you're going to have to do is get to the point of the game where you're doing the disaster piece quest. This will be pretty early on. It'll be the one where you're helping Judy find out something about Evelyn Parker. I don't want to spoil too much about this one, but it's a main story quest. You have to do it to progress the game. In this, you'll have to go to Jig Street, you'll have to do a brain dance sequence, and then immediately after the brain dance sequence, you and Judy are going to go to this industrial complex. It's the one location where you're actually going to engage in combat. More or less, you're going to exit the van, go through, clear out the first wave of enemies, and then Judy will say, okay, I'm going to meet you over there. Basically, as she runs up to you and is going to meet you to progress into the sub-levels of this area, don't go into the sub-level. In fact, it seems like if you progress any further from this point, I'm showing you in the background, you can't do this exploit, but more or less from this point, just run out. Run away from this location and you'll have Judy following you around. You can get into your car, do a bunch of other quests, whether it be other main quests or other side quests, and she'll tag along with you. She'll help you out in combat. She's not super helpful, definitely has that typical companion AI, but especially at early levels, it can be pretty handy to have her there with you, and it makes the world feel a bit less lonely. Unfortunately, you can't really fast travel with her or to leave her wherever you fast traveled from, but I think most people are not playing this game using a ton of fast traveling anyway, so having her at your side or in that car with you could be a nice counterbalance to that. Now, of course, the big problem is you can't progress this quest anymore. You can't even do Judy's own side quests because you need to progress the disaster piece side quest to unlock Judy's side quests. That's a cool little thing you could do on subsequent playthroughs. It is an interesting way to play with Judy always at your side, and you could actually do a lot of other content in Cyberpunk without progressing this quest. But otherwise, yeah, those are 15 or so more tips to improve your experience in Cyberpunk 2077. Hopefully this video taught you something new. If it did, you can get subscribed. I've made 2 other videos like this, and I have a couple more on the way. A few left over that didn't make it into this one, a few others I'm still testing and exploring. But as always, again, I hope you're enjoying the game even despite some of the controversy. I hope you found this informative, but I hope to see you all next time. Later.